Welcome back to the Advanced Photo Manipulation Movie Poster Effects course. My name is Kirk Nelson. We're now on Lesson 12. In this lesson, we will deal with the lighting effects. Okay, so here's where we last left our project. We added some great environmental effects in this. We changed up the clouds in the sky, and we added a nice shadow and a reflection on that building. Now, the lighting on our robot looks pretty good, but it's not quite as seamless as I'd like it to be to make this a more cohesive, full, and complete design. So that's what we're going to work on in this lesson. First of all, I want to find that sword group and pull it out of the base robot group, because I don't want it to be affected by these next couple of steps, because I'm going to create yet another merged layer from this base robot. We've done this several times now, and I'm going to set that to overlay, and it darkens it up quite a bit and pull that opacity down to about 50%. So that in itself adds quite a bit more contrast and accentuates the colors significantly within that robot. So now I'm actually going to merge these two together. And once again, I'm willing to do this because I've got backups of this file. I can go back to some of those other source files if I need to get the construction layers of this back again. Okay, now here's another good point that if you want to go in and add a little bit more scratch and rust damage to the robot, this would be a good time to do it. Okay, so that's looking really nice and beat up and dirty and grungy. I'm happy with the way that effect is working out. Now, it's time to work on setting this robot into the scene. Because down here at the feet, we've got to be able to mask out the areas where the trees are. So first of all, I'm going to add a layer mask to the robot and then hide it while I make a selection of the trees. And I'll do that using the quick selection tool and touching that up as I go along by holding down the Option or the Alt key as I'm creating the selection here. And then the Refine Edge is really helpful for this by clicking the Smart Radius box, giving an increase of the radius there, and painting over the edges where the trees are. It does a really good job of helping to smooth out those odd areas when it comes to selecting the trees. Okay, so I've got a selection made of the tree areas and over here and over these treetops here along with this light post. So as we reveal the robot, we go back to the mask that we just added to that layer and we fill that selection with black. And that creates a good interweaving of those elements together so that the trees are logically in front of his legs. Okay, now for these next couple of steps, you have the option of doing them directly on the layer or transforming it first to a smart object. The difference being that the smart object will allow you to go back in and readjust the settings for the next couple of steps, but not using it as a smart object is clearly more direct and actually a simpler process. So if you wish to transform this to a smart object, you would right click on it and go Convert to Smart Object here. Now that does sync in the mask with that smart object, which isn't really that big of a deal. So the first thing I want to do is add a slight blur to this, because as we're looking at this image of the robot, it's got a slightly different focal distance to it than the surrounding area. The area that's directly next to it is a slightly blurred image compared to the robot itself. So I'm just going to use the actual filter, blur, blur. And that just gives a really slight off-focus effect to it. It's very subtle, but it is rather important when it comes to trying to match up different elements within the composition, because if the elements do not have a very similar focal value to them, it becomes obvious that they are a composite. And so to enhance the believability of it, you want to try to match that up as best you can. Okay, so next we are going to use the actual lighting effects filter by going to Filter, Render, Lighting Effects. And this filter will actually add a lot more lighting value to the robot that's really going to be critical for the way we composite this into the scene. Now I've already got the lights set up previously to how I really want them to look, but I want to walk through them with you just so you know exactly what I'm doing. This top one up here is a spotlight that's added either by just adding the lights or using the 2 o'clock spotlight preset and then making adjustments to it. I've got it up above and to the left of the robot because that's clearly where the light source is coming from in the background photograph. It's set to spot. The color is white. My intensity is at 44. The hotspot's at 92. And you can see the exposure's at 3, the gloss at -7, and the metallic at 100. That should yield the results similar to what you see there. Now, I also added a point light. You can add the lights just by clicking on the icons up here. And I put the point light down here close to where his knee is, because what I'm expecting to do in the overall scene is to have almost a fire or an explosion or some sort of very hot colored light source here. So I added this point light here with an intensity of 27 and a nice orange color to it. And I kept the exposure at 3 and the gloss at -7 and the metallic at 100. Now, the benefit to adding these to a smart object is that you can always go back in and re-edit those. Even after it's been applied, you can double click on that lighting effect again and it will reopen those light settings. So it's actually pretty handy to have that so that after you begin layering in some of the surrounding elements, if you find that the lighting's not really working out, you can go back in and change it. Okay, now to make a much more dramatic lighting appearance to this, I'm going to clip a curves adjustment layer to the robot. So I'm holding down the Alt or the Option key as I select it, which gives me this new layer dialog box where I want to enable the Use Previous Layer to create clipping mask. All right, now to really pop those highlights, I'm going to grab this top corner here and move it over just about in line with that first guideline there. And then I'm going to add another point about where this middle vertical guideline intersects that curve and just pull it up ever so slightly. And you can see exactly how that's really popping the highlights on that robot. Okay, so next we want to make sure the coloring is matching well with the environment there. And since we used that gradient map on the background, let's use that same thing on the robot to set the coloring too. So the gradient map that I have down here, I'm going to hold down the Alt or the Option key and just copy it up in line with the robot. Clip it to it, then remove that mask that we painted on before. We want the entirety of the robot to receive the same coloring. But in this case, I'm going to set the blending mode to color dodge and pull the opacity down to about halfway. Okay, now the last step is to darken up a little bit of the legs because that lighting effects added a bright light along here when really there wouldn't be, because the overhead light would be overpowering it, and a lot of these areas down here would be in shadow. So let's add a new layer that gets automatically clipped to the base robot layer simply because the layers above it have been clipped, and call this leg shadows. I'm going to set this to multiply. Use my paintbrush with a soft edge to it. Start with a low opacity and just begin painting in some darker areas. Okay, there we go. All right, guys, that brings lesson 12 to a close. We've done some really intricate lighting effects on this robot, and we've created some very subtle and nuanced techniques to really make this thing look dramatic, look exciting, yet realistic, like it's a well-composited scene and everything's starting to fit together again. Be sure to catch the next lesson, lesson 13, because I've got something really cool in store there. We're going to use one of the clouds from the background to create a custom brush that we can use to paint in smoke around the legs of the robot. It's really cool. You're not going to want to miss it.